Hello and welcome to part 2 of Citizens Forum this week. This is being filmed on Wednesday, February 27th, which is Anti-Bullying Day. And you will see by our guest shirt, he's in support of that. I'd like to thank our volunteer camera people and board people and Shaw staff who make this possible. It's being filmed in the beautiful Memorial Arena on Blanchard Street. The reason I'm going to be talking to Andrew Wynn-Williams, and we're going to be talking about homelessness. And the reason for this interview was because I was walking down the street a few days ago, or a week ago, and I went past a bus shelter. There was a sign there saying unacceptable. And it was a picture of, I don't remember, but basically the theme was homelessness is unacceptable. And I thought, yeah, that's absolutely right. Homelessness is unacceptable. So Andrew Wynn-Williams, you're with a group called, I think, Victoria Homelessness?
The Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness.
The Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness. It's been around, I think, for a few years?
Yeah, it started in about 2008.
Okay. And I really want to know, what can we do to move ahead rapidly from where we are now? I assume it just takes a bit of money.
Well, that's the bottom line,
Yeah.
is the bottom line. So that's very true. So,
but if some, let's put it this way, if some money came and you were, let's say, coordinating with others across Canada, you're here in Victoria, the money's there, you can begin to solve the problem. How do you begin to solve it? Because it's been a long time in coming.
Housing. So in a city like Victoria, the key is more affordable housing and more supportive housing. So the difference there is affordable housing is just housing that through some sort of government subsidy or co-op or whatever, people can afford, just regular folk. Supportive housing is housing that people who need some sort of supports in order to live, to stay housed, can stay housed. Those are kind of the two basic categories of housing that we're looking for.
So, I mean, that sounds very, very simple and straightforward. We need housing that people can afford, and we need supportive housing for people who not only need the housing, but need some help too.
Right.
I guess we're finished.
That's it. It sounds easy, and it's a little more. It's obviously a little more complicated than that. There are prevention measures, and so for us, the idea behind ending homelessness is not that no one will ever be homeless, but that no one will be homeless for more than a couple weeks. You know, no one will have to be in a shelter for more than a couple weeks before they can find some kind of safe, appropriate, affordable housing. So
I just want to say that's the way it used to be in Canada. When I grew up, I mean, I grew up in Winnipeg, so, you know, it's difficult to live on the streets, but when I first came to Victoria, there was no homeless problem. I mean, people simply were not homeless. There was, as you said, there was a few people, but there were a lot of supports for them, and it was very, very small.
Well, it's kind of crept up on us, and there's been a lot of different factors that have created that. I don't want to really get into too much detail about what's happened in the past that may or may not have contributed to it. You know, for example, court cases, you're no longer allowed to institutionalize people without their consent. So a lot of people have ended up on the street because of mental health issues. But, you know, I think the first myth you need to address is the myth that people are on the street because they're drug addicted or because they have mental health issues or etc. People are on the street because there's not enough affordable housing. And I'll give an example of what I mean there. So let's take a drug addiction issue. My grandfather, who was 87, well, my grandfather was old, obviously being my grandfather, he once said to me, I suppose by modern day standards, I'm an alcoholic. As I'm 87, that doesn't really matter. Well, he's right, it didn't matter for him, but it didn't matter for him not because he was 87. It didn't matter because he was a wealthy retired banker who kept cases of scotch under the stairs. So because he could afford to live, his alcoholism didn't put him at risk. Whereas if someone has a poor income and has some sort of addiction issues, be it alcohol or some other kind of health addiction issue, they will be at risk because it'll impact on their ability to gain income, etc.
Now, you said that the base problem is a shortage of affordable housing.
Correct.
Now, the government of Canada, and maybe the provincial governments as well, used to build a significant amount of affordable housing.
So first, let me give you a few facts first, so we can sort of get a scale of what we mean by lack of affordable housing. So, if you are, for example, on a disability pension, your shelter allowance, so the portion of that pension that you are allowed to, is dedicated to shelter, is $375. Same for someone who's on welfare, on income assistance. The average rent for a bachelor in Greater Victoria is $695. So you're looking at a massive gap right there. That's one quick example of why affordable housing is the key driver. Another is vacancy rates. Vacancy rates in Greater Victoria are extremely low. They've come up a bit over the past couple of years, but the rents have not dropped as a result yet. So we've still got that kind of high rent, relatively low vacancy. You know, we were, I believe, one of the 5th most expensive city in Canada last time we looked. If a living wage, by living wage we mean you don't have money for holidays, you don't have money to save money for your retirement, you can't save for tuition for kids or something. Just a basic living wage, which includes food, adequate shelter, et cetera, in Victoria, is $18.10 an hour for 2012. So that kind of puts you in perspective of what we mean by kind of lack of affordable housing. There's just
but that problem is solvable.
Now,
we
that
can
problem is
build
solvable.
affordable housing.
We can build affordable housing. So if we take the supportive housing, for example, which is our primary focus right now because the majority of those who are chronically homeless need supportive housing. We estimate, we did a housing procurement action plan last March. We estimated that we need about another 719 new units, along with some units that would be supplied by rent supplements. In other words, you can house people in the private sector with supports by giving them some rent supplements so they just get a little bit of extra. The total cost, so this includes paying off the capital, providing the supports, keeping up the buildings, all that cost for those 719 units would be about $13.9 million a year. And that includes paying off the capital, so we'd own the buildings when we're done.
So I think you just said that what we need in terms of supportive housing in Victoria is
719 units.
Okay, and that would basically solve the problem.
Yeah.
And I think you just said that in order to build and maintain and run and have the supporting people there and everything else would cost $13.9
million
a year.
So that sounds like a giant, scary number.
No, it doesn't. It sounds like nothing.
It's about, if you actually break it down, it's about a dime per person per day in Greater Victoria. $
14 million, I mean, in terms of money that governments throw around is nothing, or $3.5 million. I think you said $13.5 million a year?
13.9.
That's nothing. I mean, you're telling me that we can solve the homelessness problem, a large part of it in Victoria, for $14 million a year, and it's not happening, and it's never happened. So, I mean, this is absolutely shocking. I mean, it makes no sense. Why didn't we solve the problem 10 years ago?
Well, I mean, I can't speak to 10 years ago.
No.
I can speak to the future. And so this brings us back to the campaign that you mentioned. We have been, we began this campaign to raise the profile of the issue because, in fairness, a lot of work has been done recently. So, over the past few years, several hundred units have come online. When the coalition was founded in 2008, the Mayor's Task Force at that time estimated that homelessness in Greater Victoria would increase at 20 to 30% per year. We are now flat. So, we've stemmed the tide, essentially. and now we need to start going back down the other side. And so, it's not hopeless. We can end it. It is
I've
doable.
never been more hopeful. I mean, it sounds like $14 million a year has Ms. Clark and Mr. Dix, who is probably to come. I mean, the solution could start tomorrow, it sounds like, and there's absolutely no reason it's not happening. I mean, it's equally amazing that I don't know this, that nobody knows it, that for $14 million a year, we could really be moving in the right direction. Right. It's crazy.
So this is why we're starting this campaign, which is to raise awareness in the public and then to turn that awareness into action in terms of letting our MLAs and MLA candidates know that we want action on this issue. So the campaign's going in a couple different phases. Right now is essentially just straight social media. We want people to share on Facebook, so they can go to find us on Facebook. We're Home for Hope, or they can go to our regular website, which is victoriahomelessness.ca. So we want people to just share our data, share our information, and share those unacceptable images that you showed at the beginning, around with all their friends within the community. Just homelessness is still out there, and it's unacceptable. And then the second thing they can do right now is they can tweet with Twitter to hashtag unacceptableYYJ, and anything that gets tweeted to that, we will retweet to MLAs and MLA candidates. So this is the kind of what Obama has done in taking advantage of social media, is you tweet stuff to us and we will tweet it onwards.
But I'd have to say that it sounds like they don't care, because it sounds like they could have solved, I mean, $14 million in the provincial government or the federal government is chicken feed.
Well, that's why we need to make sure that we keep the pressure on, and then we will follow that up. We'll have an email campaign as well with email e-cards. So
people should definitely be doing that.
People should participate, and the reality is that we can talk about it amongst ourselves as much as we like, but we need to take action in terms of talking to our elected officials so that they understand that we want change.
You know, it is, my kids think it's normal to have homelessness. There's absolutely no need in Canada for homelessness. It's absolutely a disgrace. And, you know, in part, I think it's almost been deliberately foisted upon us. I can remember the whole history of this as it played out over the last 40 years.
Well, I don't think anyone would deliberately foist it upon us. I think that's a bit much. But I think there has been, as I said, there has been we've got to remember that there has been positive action taken over the past number of years. And,
yes, there has.
And for us, we want to continue that positive action.
Yes.
If you think about 4 or 5 years ago and think of what Pandora Street looked like then. Now, part of it is we've been able to provide a lot more shelter for people, but that's just shelter. The next step is to provide them with housing. So this is why we have to keep the pressure on, keep building the new housing. The provincial government has been actually better than the federal government. So today, for example, in the House of Commons, Bill C-400, which was a private member's bill, was put on the table, which essentially called for a national housing strategy. At that time, the bill itself did not call specifically for funding, it just called for we need a strategy. The bill was defeated, so we remain the only country in the G8 that does not have a national housing strategy.
Now this happened today?
Today in the House of Commons.
February 27th in the House of Commons. The most amazing part of this to me is that when you told me this a short while ago, I'd never heard about it. So here a bill was voted on today in the House of Commons to have a national housing strategy, and it failed. Who voted for and against?
Well, almost all of the opposition parties voted for, and the Conservatives voted against.
You say almost all of the opposition parties.
I can't remember
okay,
exactly who
okay,
voted which,
okay,
for which way. I wouldn't want to say everyone, but
Yeah,
because I haven't seen the exact numbers. But I know that the opposition parties in general were supportive of the bill.
Well, to me, I'm coming away from this with a real sense of hope, because when I hear how little it would cost to really make a significant dent
It is
in
possible.
this problem.
It is. A lot of people think that homelessness is something that we're going to be stuck with forever, but that's not the case. We can end it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
$14 million a year would provide supportive housing for those who need it, including paying for the housing.
Yep.
And for the supports. Now, I'm assuming there's also a group of people who don't need supportive housing; they just need housing.
So that's the second piece. But if you look at the resources that are consumed currently by those who are street entrenched, and you look at the amount of cost they consume in healthcare, the amount of cost they consume in policing, the amount it costs to keep someone in a shelter, the amount that it costs to the ancillary impacts on the business
It's
community.
costing us more to do this.
Yes, it costs us.
than to
Homelessness
provide
costs us
housing.
more than it does to provide housing. That's there's been a number of studies that have shown that.
So if I said we do have a national housing strategy and this is it,
well, part
what
of the
would
challenge,
you say?
part of the challenge then, and I like to be quite balanced on this, otherwise people will tune me out. Part of the challenge is we say it's costing X amount in policing, but by reducing that cost, we're not necessarily going to save that money. That those policing resources will be dedicated elsewhere. It's not we're going to be able to take money away from the police.
Elsewhere.
We're not going to be able to take money away from the police and put it someplace else. Or within healthcare, it'll increase efficiency, but we're not going to be able to take money away from healthcare and put it into housing. Okay. So to say that we're actually saving that money is a bit of a misnomer. We're just saying that it's right now the cost structure that it is justifiable to put that extra money into housing to create efficiencies elsewhere in the system.
Andrew Wynn-Williams, thank you very much for doing this. It's been very informative to me. I think that homelessness in Canada is a disgrace. I think that we can obviously solve it, and it will save us money to solve it. I'll put it that way. Let's move ahead on this issue. I don't know what people can do, but at least realize that this is the problem and it's solvable. Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Hello and welcome to part 3 of Citizens Forum. Our guest in this segment is Mazin Al Nahawi. Mazin is a Palestinian. We're going to be talking about the situation in the Middle East, Palestine and Canada and Israel. We're going to talk about the root causes of the question. We're going to be talking about Canada's involvement, both in the past and now. We're going to talk about the possibilities to achieve justice and real peace there, which is the way to go, I'm sure, and then what Canadians can do. So, Mazin, we've got a short time to cover a remarkably important issue. What are the root causes of what are the root causes of the Palestinian question? So I'll ask you that question.
First of all, thanks, Jack, for having me. The issue for many things is so complicated, but if we use the right terms and look to the history in the back, we see it's a colonial process where it started mainly late 19th century, and through that process evolved to end up with a state, the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, where the Palestinians call it a Nakba. Many people add many layers to this story, but actually it's a process, as I said, colonization process, and a lot of people not aware of, like prominent thinkers and humanists like even Albert Einstein, Freud, Gandhi, and Mandela. I choose these 4 because 4 of these 4 talk about this issue very clearly. Like let me read something by Einstein. I think many people don't know.
Now, Einstein was Jewish.
Yes, and he was anti-Zionist, and like many other Jews in the beginning of the movement of the Zionists, were against the idea of bringing all Jews from around the world to Palestine, because many of them, they were aware that Palestine already populated, has already its Arab population, and the Zionists, their project was to compete with other two ideas at that time. One say that Jews need to assimilate with other societies, like in German or France or England, or the Orthodox Jews who think that they need to stay away until by God's action or they will be back. But the Zionist movement, actually, it's a secular, mainly, and not religious. But later they did use many of the religious myths to make up the whole story of the Jewish state in Palestine.
So I think a couple of things you said that interest me is that there was actually a debate between Jewish people prior to the creation of the State of Israel, with a lot of Jewish people saying it's not really the right thing to do.
Yes, especially, I mean, in Russia, many, for example, let's read what Einstein said, and he described exactly the issue about Palestine. Okay. He said, when a real and final catastrophe should befall us in Palestine, the first responsible for it would be the British, and the second responsible for it, the terrorist organizations built up from our own ranks. I am not willing to see anybody associated with these misled and criminal people. He's talking about Menachem Begin and the right-wing Zionists, who now we have the same thing, like Ben Netanyahu. He is represent the same kind of view.
Okay. So, I mean, what happened was Israel was created, and the next, out of a place where there was a people living there.
The population of Ottoman and the British occupied Palestine. I mean, the Ottomans occupied Palestine for 400 years, but specifically in 1872, they started to make counting for every person living in their territory for purposes of taxes. And they counted Muslim, Christian, and Jews. Why they did that? Because Christian and Jews had to pay higher taxes, but they could not serve in the army, the Ottoman army. Muslim, on the other hand, they have to pay less taxes, but serve in the Ottoman army. And the Ottoman army, just to remember, they are an occupying power. That's mean people, I mean, no Palestinian or Syrian or any Arab would like to serve in that army. It was kind of a punishment. So they counted everyone for that purposes. We see that by 1850, there was 2.5% of the population is a Jewish population. Now, first who talk about having a Jewish state in Palestine were actually the Protestants, who went in 1850 to prepare the land for the Jews, to return for the Jews. The early Zionist movement, when they went there, they start to establish little colonialists, and if we read the diaries of Herzl, and this is actually one of the important things that to understand Zionism, we need to read their own literature. I'm talking about people like Herzl, Weizmann, Ben Gurion, Jabotinsky, Moshe Dayan, Begin. I mean, the one who were behind.
And what were they saying?
Like, for example, Chaim Weizmann in 1917, after the Balfour Declaration, which said that Britain will allow European Jews to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. He said that with regard to the Arab question, the British told me that there are several 100,000 Negroes there, but that this matter has no significance.
When was the Balfour Declaration?
It's 1917.
So in 1917, Britain said they would allow a Jewish state to be created. And it was 30 years later
We have the Jewish
when
state
it happened.
But actually, 1 year before that, there was a secret agreement between Britain and England, became known later in public in 1920, called Sykes-Picot, where France and England divided what is now Syria. What is now Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan. Usually it used to be Greater Syria, divided to 4 regions. Lebanon, as I mentioned, Palestine, Jordan, and Syria. And the following year, in 1917, Balfour gave Palestine, or the British gave Palestine, to be a Jewish state.
And then the next thing that happened was World War II began, and
the Holocaust.
And
we speed up the migrant.
Okay, I just want to say, if you ever want to Google Bush and Hitler and Guardian, which is the British newspaper, The Guardian, Google Bush and Hitler and Guardian, and you'll see the Bush family was funneling money from Western interests to Adolf Hitler and the Nazis in the early days, right, to get them started. So then along comes the Nazi regime. The Jews are forced out. They're not allowed into North America, amongst other places, and they're forced into Palestine.
And don't forget the American corporation who helped Hitler,
the American
from
corporations helping Hitler,
to Ford, IBM.
So in 1917, Balfour says, yes, you can create a Jewish state. And the next thing is the Jews are pushed out of Europe and into the Jewish state.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
And actually there is one amazing thing, that the Zionist and the anti-Semite, the Nazi, both of them agree about that they need to get out of Europe and send the Palestinians. And actually they had a deal in 1933 between the Nazi and the Zionists to transfer young Jews to Palestine. They did not want to the elderly, disabled. Actually, Golda Meir in 1950s, or I'm not really sure the time, sent a letter to the Hungarian, to the Israeli ambassador in Hungary, asked them exactly, and this letter was published in Haaretz, said, don't send us disabled and old Jews. It's a racist, believe me, when I'm saying racist state.
No, I think that many of the things you've just said are historically documented. It's fact.
And by the way, the European mentality about looking to the native people as not really as a people started earlier in Berlin Conference, when the European went or rushed to Africa. So that's why I think the Palestine issue, it's just another colonial struggle. We cannot add to it the religious layer and.
So as usual, we've spent too much time on the first part, but let's move on to Canada's involvement, if you want, both in the past and now.
One of the most important thing, what we called what happened in 1948 catastrophe, and Nakba. Canada has many Canadians tell me, we know it's a lot of trouble there, but what our relationship to that? Many Canadians don't know that their government in 1940, especially to name specifically Lester Pearson, for example, they used to call him Lord Balfour of Canada. We were just talking about Balfour of Britain. Now Lester Pearson, he is Balfour of Canada. This is what many Zionist movement organizations called him. Now, he is the guy who was behind the plan of a partition plan of Palestine, which gave 55% to mainly European Jews recently migrated to Palestine, and after long migration they constitute only 30%, they got 56%. Meanwhile the Arab got 46%. Any native population will not accept to divide their land with a colonial settler movement. It's that simple. Even Jabotinsky, he said exactly that words. I don't know if I can.
I don't think anybody knows who Jabotinsky
is. He is the icon for the right wing, Zionist right wing, which Netanyahu's father was assistant for, and he speaks the same, similar to what he said. He said, if you wish to colonize a land in which people are already living, you must provide a garrison for the land, or find a benefactor who will maintain that garrison on your behalf. Zionism is a colonizing adventure, and therefore it's stand or fall on the question of armed forces. The same guy said, my readers have a general idea of the history of colonization in other countries. I suggest that they consider all the precedents with which they are acquainted and see whether there is one solitary instance of any colonization being carried on with the consent of the native population. There is no such a precedent. So they were clear about their movement as a colonization movement. But later, Lester Pearson, as was talking, and many Canadians supported that movement, and specifically, they wanted to associate the Holocaust.
Yeah, and I would like to say that over the last 60 years, Canadians have been given by our government and our politicians, I think, a very one-sided view of everything that's happened in the Middle East.
Simply, we have a government say being anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. Actually,
Yes,
they forgot
crazy.
that many Jews are anti-Zionist. So how can
That's
we
right,
use that?
because Zionism just means, I don't know what Zionism is.
Zionism
It's
is a
political
movement
organization.
to it's
Yes, and you're right. Many Jews are opposed to Zionism.
so how can you call them anti-Semitic?
Exactly.
Plus, the word anti-Semitic, it's really a twisted term. Originally, a German historian linguistic chose the term Semitic to describe the Arabic, or what used to be called Arabic languages, about the Canaanite, Arabic, Hebrew, the old languages.
So it's a mistaken term in the
So,
first place.
and then later
But
the German
we've only
racists.
got a couple of minutes left, so let's move on to I think, a very important thing, the possibility to achieve justice and to achieve peace. Because here we are, it's 2013, many parts of the world are a mess, as is the Middle East. How do we move ahead from here?
First, we need to relearn really the real facts and the history, and not really, listen to what politicians are talking about the issues. Especially many of them are supporting a state.
But I'm saying, if there was a powerful force that really wanted to start to solve the problem which exists now, how do you begin to do it?
It needs to tackle two important issues. The right of return of Palestinians.
Okay.
There is over 5 or 6 million refugees. Nobody talking about these refugees. Even United Nations, when the state of supposed to be talk about the Palestine state, which Canada rejected, among other 3 unknown countries, add to them the U.S. This issue doesn't acknowledge the refugees' right to return, and the second thing, the core of the Zionist state to create a Jewish state. These two issues, a Jewish state in the 21st century.
Right.
Maybe some people
So
tell me
you're
what
saying
about
like it
Saudi
can't be a Jewish state, but it can be a state.
It should be,
It can be a state.
It should be like in our 21st century, nothing less a democratic secular state where everybody, regardless of their religion and background, race, are equal, and no, it's not that state belong to one of them and the other living as a second or a subhuman there. Now, some people will tell me, what about like Saudi Arabia or other Arabic state? Actually, we have a 22 Arabic state. Of these Arabic state where really people they're free, they want 22. We have a multi-part of in Canada, many culture, and we still call it one state. How in depth we have in there people who speak the same language, eat the same kind of food, the same kind of culture, are divided to 22 states. This is the state, the colonial leftover, and state like Saudi Arabia, which is really disgusting. This is also the result of the American and British policy, which the same state injected the Israeli apartheid in our land, Palestine. Last thing I would like to, I don't know how many times we still
40
have.
seconds.
Last thing I would like to say what Mandela said. He said our freedom is incompleted without the freedom of the Palestinian. And I would like to
Nelson Mandela.
Yeah, and when
Say it one more
Mandela
time.
himself, who knows apartheid
Yes.
very well, called the Israeli state as a apartheid, Canadian need to listen and learn.
Thank you very much, Mazin Al Nahawi, and thanks for watching Citizens Forum this week. See you next week. Thank you.